I, 28F, thought the day my son was born would be the best day of my life. But my mother-in-law, Karen, 55F, turned it into a war zone. She showed up at my hospital room, not with balloons or gifts, but with a priest, ready to force a baptism on my newborn baby while I was still weak from labor. She thought she could use God to bully me, but she forgot that I knew a secret about her past, so dark it would make the devil himself blush. Her holy act was about to be met with some unholy revenge. The problems with Karen started the day Mark introduced me to her 5 years ago. From the moment she laid eyes on me, I could feel her judgment burning through me like acid. Karen was the kind of woman who wore her religion like armor and used it as a weapon against anyone who didn't meet her impossible standards. She sat on every church committee, led the women's Bible study group, and made sure everyone knew just how holy and righteous she was. The fact that I didn't attend church every Sunday made me worse than a criminal in her eyes. Throughout our entire relationship, Karen made it clear that I wasn't good enough for her precious son. At family dinners, she would make pointed comments about how Mark's ex-girlfriend was such a devoted Christian woman who now taught Sunday school. When we announced our engagement, instead of congratulations, she gave us a lecture about the importance of having a church wedding and raising children in the faith. Mark would always just sit there quietly, never defending me, never standing up to her. He would tell me later that it was easier to just let her talk and that she didn't really mean it. But I knew better. Karen meant every single word. When I got pregnant, Karen's behavior went from annoying to unbearable. The moment we shared the news, she immediately started planning my child's entire religious life. She had already picked out the church for the baptism, chosen the godparents from her prayer group, and even bought a family heirloom christening gown that had been in her family for generations. When Mark and I told her we had decided to let our child choose their own beliefs when they were old enough to understand, she literally screamed at us. She called me a heathen who was corrupting her son and damning her grandchild's soul to hell. The pregnancy months became a battlefield. Karen would send packages to our house filled with religious books for children, crosses to hang in the nursery, and pamphlets about the dangers of raising children without God. She left voicemails on my phone quoting Bible verses about proper motherhood and the responsibilities of raising children in the church. She told every member of our extended family that I was a bad influence who was leading Mark away from his faith and destroying their family values. She even contacted my own parents who lived across the country, trying to convince them to talk sense into me. Mark's response to all of this was pathetic. He would make weak attempts to calm his mother down, saying things like, "We should all just get along for the baby's sake," but he never actually told her to stop. He never set boundaries. He never chose me and our decisions over his mother's demands. Every time I brought it up, he would say I was being too sensitive and that his mother just cared about our baby's spiritual well-being. I felt more and more alone as my due date approached, knowing that I would have to fight this battle by myself. The birth of my son Leo was long and difficult. After 18 hours of labor and an emergency C-section, I was exhausted, in pain, and emotionally drained. All I wanted was to hold my beautiful baby boy and rest. The nurses had just helped me with the first feeding, and I was finally starting to feel some peace when Karen walked through the door. At first, I thought maybe she had come to make peace, to see her grandson and share in our joy. She was carrying a gift bag and wearing a smile that almost looked genuine. Karen walked over to the bed and looked down at Leo in my arms. She said he was beautiful and that he looked just like Mark when he was born. For a brief moment, I let my guard down, thinking maybe motherhood had softened her. Then she walked back to the door and waved someone in. A man in black clothing with a white collar entered the room. Karen introduced him as Father Michael from her church, saying he had come to give Leo a special blessing. My blood turned to ice. I told her absolutely not, that we had already discussed this and made our decision. Karen's fake smile disappeared instantly. She said I was being selfish and that a simple blessing couldn't hurt anything. Father Michael stood there awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the tension in the room. That's when Mark spoke up, but not in the way I needed him to. He looked at me with pleading eyes and said, "Come on, honey, it's just a little blessing." What harm can it do? Let's not fight about this now. The betrayal hit me harder than the pain from my surgery. My own husband, the father of my child, was taking his mother's side while I lay there, vulnerable and weak. I told them all to get out, that I needed to rest. Karen huffed and said they would give me a few minutes to come to my senses. She and Father Michael stepped out into the hallway, and Mark followed them, probably to apologize for my behavior. That's when I heard it. The door wasn't fully closed, and Karen's voice carried into the room. She was telling Father Michael to just do it quickly, that they could perform the full baptism rites while the nurses were busy with shift change. She promised him a generous donation to the church for his trouble. She said, once it was done, there was nothing I could do about it, and that God would forgive them for the deception because they were saving an innocent soul. Father Michael seemed hesitant, but Karen kept pushing, saying Mark had already agreed, and that as the father, his consent was enough. Rage filled every cell in my body. This woman was planning to violate my wishes, betray my trust, and perform a religious ritual on my hours-old baby against my will. She thought she could get away with it because I was weak and she had God on her side. But she had forgotten something important. A year ago, at a family reunion, Karen's estranged sister Jean had gotten drunk and told me a secret. When Karen was 16, she had gotten pregnant. Her parents sent her away to have the baby, and she gave it up for adoption. She came back and pretended it never happened, built her perfect religious image on a foundation of lies. Nobody in her church knew. Her husband didn't even know. It was the deepest, darkest secret of the holy woman who judged everyone else. I grabbed my phone from the bedside table. My hands were shaking from exhaustion and anger, but I managed to find Jean's number. When she answered, I told her everything. I told her about the forced baptism, about the priest, about what I had overheard. Jean was furious. She said she would handle it and told me to stall them as long as possible. I didn't know what she was planning, but I trusted her more than anyone else in that moment. 20 minutes later, Karen and Father Michael came back into the room. Karen was carrying a small silver bowl filled with water, and Father Michael had an open book in his hands. Karen's face was triumphant as she told Mark to take the baby from me. Mark actually started walking toward me, reaching for Leo. I pulled my baby closer to my chest and stood up. Even though the movement sent shooting pains through my incision, I planted myself between them and my son. I said, "You will not touch my son." Karen's face turned red with anger. She started to speak, her mouth opening to unleash whatever righteous fury she had prepared. But before she could get a word out, the hospital room door swung open with force. In walked Jean, followed by 3 more people. I recognized them immediately as Pastor Roberts, the head pastor of Karen's church, and 2 of the church elders, Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton. The Hamiltons were the wealthiest donors to the church and held enormous influence over the congregation. The room fell silent. Karen's face went from red to white in seconds. Father Michael took several steps back, trying to distance himself from what was happening. Pastor Roberts looked around the room, taking in the scene of Karen holding the baptismal water, Father Michael with his book, and me standing defensively with my baby. His expression was one of deep disappointment and controlled anger. Jean spoke first, her voice loud and clear. She looked directly at Karen and said, "Is this how you treat family, Karen? Just like you treated your first baby, the one you abandoned?" The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded. Pastor Roberts and the Hamiltons turned to stare at Karen in shock. Mrs. Hamilton actually gasped. Karen's mouth opened and closed, like a fish out of water, no words coming out. Father Michael, sensing the situation had gone nuclear, quickly confessed that Karen had offered to pay him to perform the baptism without my consent. He said he had been uncomfortable with it, but felt pressured. Then he practically ran from the room. Pastor Roberts stepped forward, his voice heavy with disappointment. He said, "Karen, I'm appalled. Not only have you been living a lie all these years, preaching about family values and Christian motherhood while hiding your own past, but you've also attempted to force a religious sacrament on this woman's child against her wishes. You've bribed a priest. You've violated every principle our church stands for. Karen tried to speak to defend herself, but Jean cut her off. She said, "I have letters, Karen. Letters you wrote to the adoption agency? Letters where you said you couldn't be a mother, that you weren't ready, that you needed to live your life. Sound familiar? And now you stand here judging this young mother for her choices?" Mrs. Hamilton spoke up, her voice cold. She said, "The women's ministry will need a new leader immediately. I don't think you're fit to guide anyone in matters of faith or family." Pastor Roberts nodded in agreement. He said, "Your position on all church committees is terminated, effective immediately. You'll need to meet with the board to discuss your membership status." Karen broke down completely. Tears streamed down her face as her carefully built reputation crumbled around her. She looked at Mark for support, but he was staring at her in horror, finally seeing his mother for who she really was. She ran from the room, sobbing, her perfect image destroyed forever. The pastor and the elders apologized to me for what had happened and left quietly. John gave me a hug, careful not to hurt me, and whispered that Karen would never bother me again. Then she left too, leaving just Mark, Leo, and me in the room. Mark started apologizing immediately. He said he had no idea about his mother's past, that he couldn't believe what she had tried to do. He said he was sorry for not supporting me, for taking her side. For being weak, I let him talk until he ran out of words. Then I told him the truth. I said, "You failed as a husband today. You failed as a father. You chose your mother over your wife and child when we needed you most. I want you to leave this room. Do not come back until you decide where your loyalties lie. And if you ever take her side over mine again, you'll be signing divorce papers from your mother's basement." Mark's face crumpled. He nodded slowly and walked out, leaving me alone with my baby. As the door closed behind him, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I had won. Karen's reign of religious terror was over. Her reputation was destroyed. Her son had finally seen her true face, and most importantly, my baby was safe from her influence. I sat back down on the hospital bed, holding Leo close to my chest. He was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the battle that had just been fought over him. I kissed his tiny forehead and made him a promise. I promised that he would never be forced into anything against his will. He would make his own choices, follow his own path, and become whoever he wanted to be. Nobody would ever use God or religion or family pressure to control him. The next few days in the hospital were peaceful. Mark came back the next day with flowers and a genuine apology. He had spent the night at a hotel thinking about everything that had happened. He told me he had called his mother and told her she was not welcome in our lives until she got therapy and made real changes. He said he understood if I couldn't forgive him right away, but he wanted to earn back my trust. I told him we could try, but things would be different from now on. Our family came first, always. Karen never came back to the hospital. According to John, she had become a pariah at church. The story of what she tried to do spread quickly through the congregation. Combined with the revelation about her teenage pregnancy and adoption, her reputation was completely destroyed. She stopped attending services and shut herself away in her house. The perfect Christian woman had fallen from her pedestal, and there was no getting back up. Some might say my revenge was cruel. But when someone tries to violate your child and use religion as a weapon, you fight back with everything you have. Karen thought she could bully me because I was weak and alone. She thought her God gave her the right to override my choices. As a mother, she was wrong. In the end, her own hypocrisy and lies were her downfall. The secret she had hidden for 40 years became the sword that cut down her false righteousness. As I left the hospital with Leo, I felt stronger than ever. I had protected my child, exposed a hypocrite, and taught my husband a lesson about loyalty. The war was over, and I had won. Karen would never again have power over me or my family. My son would grow up free from her toxic influence, free to choose his own path in life. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more.